I was 18, holding my dorm move. In letter when my mother slid a glass of soda across the kitchen table and told me the money was gone. Not lost, not delayed, given away to my brother. For his business. I remember the ice clicking against the glass while she explained it like a weather report. A week before moving day, 4 years of saving. The college fund my grandmother had started before she passed, handed to Bryce so his company could breathe. 1 more month, they expected me to nod. They expected me to thank them. What I did instead is the reason you're watching this. 1 year later, the company they sacrificed me for had folded anyway. But that was only the beginning. The real reckoning took 13 years, and it found all of us at a dinner none of them saw coming. Welcome back to Last Laugh Stories, where ordinary people find the quiet strength to walk away and the patience to let the truth catch up. If a family ever asked you to make yourself smaller so someone else could shine, stay with me. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. My father was the one who'd asked me to sit. That should have warned me. In our house, sitting down meant a verdict had already been reached somewhere I wasn't invited. My name is Paige Thornton, and back then I still believed effort was a kind of currency in my family. I'd earned a half scholarship to a state business program. The rest, the part that turned a dream into a dorm key, was supposed to come from the fund. My mother, Carol, did most of the talking. My father, Ray, studied the table like it had a crack in it. It's temporary, she said. Bryce just needs a bridge. A bridge, as if my future were a detour we could pave over later. I asked when the fund had been touched. She didn't answer in dates. She answered in feelings. Your brother's company is at a real turning point. Then she said the sentence I have never been able to unhear. The one she delivered without a single tremor. His business mattered more. I waited for the part where she took it back. There wasn't one. The fund wasn't alone against the future. It was already inside Bryce's failing balance sheet, paying for vendors and back rent, and a payroll that didn't include me. My mother folded her hands like a woman who had survived a hard conversation. My father finally looked up, and what I saw in his face wasn't guilt, it was relief. They thought the difficult part was the telling. They had no idea the difficult part hadn't started. I set the move-in letter flat on the table, smoothed the fold with one thumb, and asked the only question that mattered. So, there's nothing left for me. It wasn't a question, really. It was the sound of something closing. You'd think a quiet daughter would be a relief in that moment. Instead, my silence seemed to make them nervous, so they filled it the way families do, with a story where everyone is generous. Megan, my brother's wife, had let herself in through the side door the way she always did, holding a casserole nobody had asked for. She set it on the counter and read the room in 2 seconds. This is what good families do, she said brightly. We carry each other. My mother nodded, grateful for an ally. My father added that Bryce had always been the one with vision, that the company could employ half the town someday. And then Carol reached across the loo and patted my hand and said the line they must have rehearsed. Be proud of supporting the family. Proud. I turned the word over and found nothing inside that belonged to me. Support implies a choice. Nobody had asked me. They had simply spent my life and were now offering me the bill marked paid in full. Megan kept going, talking about how she and Bryce planned to pay it forward once the company stabilized. My mother's shoulders loosened with every sentence, because as long as we were all talking about pride and family, no one had to say the truer word, which was theft. I noticed how easily they slid from "we took your money" to "you should feel honored we let you help." That slide is the whole trick. They weren't asking me to forgive them. They were asking me to agree that there was nothing to forgive. I didn't agree. I didn't argue either. I just looked at the casserole, steaming on the counter, and understood, finally, exactly where I stood in this house. To understand why that glass of soda landed like a slammed door, you have to know what that fund meant. It wasn't extra. It was the only bridge I had. The scholarship covered tuition at half. Room, board, books. The cost of simply existing 80 miles from this kitchen. That came from the fund and only the fund. I'd run the numbers 100 times on the back of a register receipt. I knew them the way you know your own pulse. Without that money, there was no fall semester, not a smaller version, none. I had spent 4 years building the kind of application that gets a kid out of Millbrook. AP classes I studied for at the diner where I bussed tables. A part-time job I never missed. Recommendation letters from teachers who told me I was the one who'd go far. I had already mailed my housing deposit. I'd already labeled boxes in my closet, kitchen, bedding. The lamp from the thrift store. The dream wasn't abstract. It had a move-in date and a building number. And in one afternoon, my parents had quietly reached into that dream and removed the floor. Here is the part that still surprises people. I wasn't crushed because I'd lost a dorm room. I was 18 and stubborn. Dorm rooms can be replaced. I was crushed because the fund had been my grandmother's promise, the one adult in my life who'd looked at me and seen a future worth funding. Spending it on Bryce wasn't just spending money. It was spending her. And the worst part was how reasonable they thought they sounded. They believed the right daughter would understand. So I let them keep believing it for exactly 1 more week. It would be easy to tell you my parents woke up one morning and chose Bryce. The truth is slower and sadder than that. Bryce had always been the family's investment, and I'd always been the family's insurance. He got the car at 16. I got the bus pass and a lecture about gratitude. When he wanted to start the company at 26, my father signed without a meeting. When he wanted office space he couldn't afford, my mother lent him the kitchen remodel money. Each time it was framed as belief. Each time the word vision did a lot of heavy lifting. And each time I watched the family's net worth quietly drain in one direction, like a sink that only flows toward the favored child. I never resented Bryce for being loved. I resented how love in our house always seemed to come with an invoice that landed on my side of the table. There was something else, too. Something I only half noticed that week. My parents talked about Bryce's company the way you talk about a sick relative. Hushed, protective, afraid. When I asked my father a simple question about how the loan was structured, he changed the subject so fast it nearly gave me whiplash. "Don't worry about grown-up things," he said to a daughter 1 week from college. That sentence sat wrong in my stomach. Grown-up things. They had no problem treating me like an adult when it came to handing over my future. But the second I asked how deep the company's hole really was, I was a child again. I didn't know yet what they were hiding. But I knew the shape of a secret when one was sitting in the room. Whatever Bryce's company owed, my parents weren't just supporting it. They were standing behind it with something I couldn't see. I want to be honest about the version of me who almost stayed because for about 3 days, I considered being the good daughter. Not out of weakness, out of habit. I had spent my whole life as the family fixer. When the power bill was late, I was the one who called the company and arranged the plan. When my parents fought, I was the one who cooked dinner so the house had something to do besides yell. When Bryce missed a payment on anything, I was the quiet machinery that kept the lights on, so no one had to admit how close the edge was. Being needed had felt for a long time like being loved. So part of me did the math the way they wanted me to. I could defer a year, work, save, reapply, be the bigger person, carry them 1 more time. I actually sat on my bed and started building that plan because I was good at plans and a plan felt better than a wound. Then I stopped. I asked myself a colder question. If I deferred a year and Bryce's company needed another bridge, would they touch my second chance, too? I already knew the answer. There would always be 1 more turning point, 1 more month. 1 more reason his business mattered more. The fixer in me wanted to save everyone. The grown woman I was becoming understood that some houses are designed so that one person does all the saving and never gets saved. I had spent 18 years being the floor everyone else stood on. I didn't decide to leave because I was fragile. I decided to leave because I was done being load-bearing. Before I packed a single box, I tried to fight it the right way. I'm telling you, This because I don't want you to think I rolled over. The morning after the kitchen, I drove to the bank that held the fund and asked to speak to someone about the account. I had the statements. I had my ID. I had the kind of nerve only an 18-year-old with nothing left to lose can summon. The banker was kind and completely unhelpful. The account was a custodial UTMA my grandmother had opened years before. On paper, my parents were the custodians, and under Ohio law, they kept control until I came of age. I'd only just turned 18, and the money was already gone, transferred out legally by the two people the law allowed to touch it. I couldn't freeze it. I couldn't claw it back. There was no account left to fight over. I asked the banker if there was anything I could do before the semester started. He looked at me with real sympathy and said the truest thing anyone said to me that week. I'm sorry. By the time you'd have standing to act, the term will already be over, so I knew I hadn't been naive. I hadn't trusted blindly. I had checked and questioned, and shown up at a bank counter ready to fight, and the trap had simply been built before I was old enough to hold the key. That's a particular kind of helplessness. The kind where you did everything right, and the structure still wins. I drove back to Millbrook, and somewhere on that 2-lane road, the grief turned into something more useful. If my future wasn't safe in that house, I wasn't going to keep storing it there. His business mattered more. Fine. I would go build something where their choices couldn't reach me. I pulled into the driveway, walked past the cooling casserole, and started taking my labeled boxes down from the closet. I didn't make a scene. That disappointed them more than a scene would have. My mother kept waiting for the explosion that would let her feel like the reasonable one. I never gave it to her. I packed the lamp, the bedding, the box marked kitchen, and I called my friend Dana, who had a hatchback and no questions. When my parents realized I was actually loading the car, the script changed fast. You're being dramatic. My mother said, don't make this about you. My father stood in the doorway and told me I'd regret throwing away the family over money. I almost laughed. They'd thrown away my future over money, but somehow I was the one ending the family. I stopped on the porch with the last box and looked at them. And I didn't raise my voice. I'm not throwing anything away, I said. I'm taking what's left of mine. Dana's hatchback smelled like French fries and freedom. We drove the 80 miles to Columbus with the windows down because the air conditioning was broken. And I watched Millbrook shrink in the side mirror until it was just a smudge of grain silos and bad decisions. That first night, I slept on the floor of a rented room. I split 3 ways in a house with a landlord who took cash and asked nothing. My phone buzzed once. A text from my mother. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Come home. I turned the phone face down. I lay there on a borrowed sleeping bag, 18 years old, with no plan, no fund, and no fall semester. And for the first time in my life, the silence in a room was mine. If you've ever packed a bag and left a house that stopped seeing you, you already know how loud that quiet is. Stay with me, because what came next surprised even me. Comment the word left if you've been there, and subscribe so the algorithm doesn't bury the rest. Columbus did not roll out a welcome mat. The dream school was off the table that year, so I did the unglamorous thing nobody makes videos about. I got a job in a warehouse on the packing line, scanning and taping boxes for 10 hours at a stretch. My feet learned a new kind of tired. I enrolled at the community college for night classes because the dream of an education hadn't died. It had just gotten cheaper and harder, which it turns out is a fair trade. I budgeted in a way that would frighten most people. I knew the price of every grocery item I touched. I split a phone plan, a couch, and a bathroom with 2 roommates I barely saw. Rent ate the first check, food, and the bus ate the second. Whatever survived went into a coffee can on my closet shelf, which I called, without irony, the future. Some nights I was too exhausted to study, and I did it anyway. Because tired is not the same as defeated, and I'd learned the difference on a 2-lane road. My family assumed I'd come crawling back by Thanksgiving. They didn't understand that I'd already done the hardest part. I'd left. Everything after leaving was just arithmetic and stubbornness. And I had a gift for both. At the warehouse, I started noticing things other people on the line ignored. Which products shipped constantly, which ones came back, which cheap items people couldn't stop buying. I didn't know it yet. But I was getting an education my dream school couldn't have sold me. Taping one box at a time, 8 hours a day, watching the whole machine of buying and selling move through my hands. I just had to figure out how to stand on the right side of it. The public library became my second job, the one that didn't pay yet. After my shifts, I'd sit at a scratched wooden table with a stack of business books and a free internet connection. And I taught myself the thing nobody in my family thought I could do. I learned how online stores actually worked. Margins, suppliers, shipping costs, the difference between revenue that looks pretty and profit that keeps the lights on. I watched hundreds of free tutorials, the kind made by people who'd figured it out before me and were generous enough to explain it. My grandmother used to say, "The cheapest thing in the world is advice nobody takes." I took all of it. My first attempt was a small disaster, and I'm glad it was. I bought a pallet of discounted home goods from a liquidation site with money from the coffee can, cheap kitchen gadgets, off-brand storage bins, 100 little things. I listed them online and waited for the orders to roll in. They didn't. Half the items were junk, my photos were bad, and I'd priced everything wrong. I lost most of that first stake. For one night, I sat on my closet floor next to the empty coffee can and let myself feel like my parents had been right about me. Then I got up there and did the thing my family never did with Bryce's failures. I looked the mistake straight in the eye and learned its name. I'd bought what I liked instead of what people wanted. I'd guessed instead of watching. So I went back to the warehouse floor and started watching for real, taking notes on which products moved, which complaints repeated, which gaps no one was filling. Somewhere in those returns and those tape guns, a real idea was forming. I just hadn't met it yet. The calls started around the holidays, which is when families like mine remember they have a daughter. My mother's voice on the phone was a careful blend of warmth and pressure, the verbal equivalent of a hug with a knee in your back. "We miss you," she'd say, and before I could answer, "Bryce is under so much stress right now." Every conversation bent toward the same gravity. My absence was making things hard for the family. My choice to leave was somehow a thing being done to them. Megan got involved too, texting me long messages about unity. Family supports family page. There it was again. The family religion, whose only commandment was that I give you and they receive. "Be proud of supporting the family," she wrote, lifting the exact phrase like it was scripture. I read it twice. Standing in the break room with a vending machine dinner getting cold, I almost typed a paragraph back. A good paragraph. The kind that explains and defends and tries one last time to be understood. Then I deleted it. I was learning something that took me years to fully trust. You cannot win an argument with people who need you to lose. So I stopped feeding it. I answered the practical questions and ignored the guilt. Eventually, I stopped answering the guilt-shaped calls altogether. Not out of cruelty, out of conservation. Every hour I spent defending my decision was an hour I wasn't building the thing that would make the decision irrelevant. My silence drove them crazy, which I won't pretend I didn't notice. They'd built a whole story in which I was selfish and emotional. And a calm, quiet daughter who simply went back to work didn't fit the script. So, they kept calling, hoping for a fight. And I kept taping boxes, saving the only ammunition that ever mattered. News travels strangely when you've left a small town. It comes sideways through a cousin's off-hand comment or a former neighbor who friends you online just to nose around. That's how I learned Bryce's company was bleeding. The turning point my tuition had supposedly funded had turned all right, just not in the direction anyone promised. There were whispers about late paychecks, a supplier who stopped delivering, an office that had gone quiet. My cousin Rachel, the one honest voice in the extended family, called me one evening and didn't bother with pleasantries. "You should know they're scared," she said. "Your folks are putting more money in. More money." I felt the cold logic click into place. My parents weren't propping up Bryce out of pure favoritism anymore. They were trapped. Whatever they'd attached themselves to was now too big to walk away from, so they kept feeding it, throwing good money after my future, after Bryce's debts. Rachel hesitated, then added the part that made my skin prickle. "Paige, I think the house is in it somehow." The house. The one my parents had spent 30 years paying off. The one thing in their world that was supposed to be untouchable. I thanked Rachel and sat in the dark of my rented room for a long time. I wasn't gloating. I wanted to feel vindicated, and instead I felt something heavier. The specific dread of watching people you can't quite stop loving drive toward a cliff with their eyes open. I didn't call them. There was nothing I could say that they'd hear over the roar of their own denial. But I started watching the road behind me a little more carefully, because I understood now that my family's troubles weren't finished. They were just beginning to come due. The idea finally found me on an ordinary Tuesday. After months of watching what shipped and what came back, I noticed the same complaint over and over on a whole category of cheap home goods, storage and organizing products that looked fine in photos and fell apart in a week. People wanted them. People kept buying them and people kept being disappointed. That gap was my opening. I didn't have much, but I had the coffee can refilled, a warehouse worker's eye for product, and a stubbornness that had survived a kitchen table. I found a manufacturer who'd make a sturdier version under my own small label. I ordered the smallest run I could afford, took my own photographs in good light against a clean sheet, and wrote honest descriptions that promised exactly what the product did. The first batch sold out in 11 days. I almost didn't believe the dashboard. I refreshed it like it might take it back. Then I did the thing that separates a hobby from a business. I poured every dollar of profit straight back in. Bigger orders, better photos, a second product, then a third. I worked the warehouse shift, came home, and ran my own operation until 2 in the morning. My roommates thought I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had a little. My one real flaw in those years wasn't doubt. It was that I didn't know how to stop. I skipped meals. I canceled plans. I treated rest like a luxury I hadn't earned yet. Over-responsibility had followed me out of Millbrook and put on a business suit. But for the first time, the machine I was feeding was mine. Every late night built something with my name on it, not a bridge to someone else's failure. The numbers were small, but they were real. And real I was learning. Compounds. A package arrived from Rachel that spring with no warning. Inside was a battered tin box I recognized instantly. The kind that once held holiday cookies, dented on one corner, the lid painted with faded flowers. It had been my grandmother's. Rachel's note said she'd found it while helping clear an old closet and thought it should be mine, that no one else even knew what it was. My hands knew before my brain did. I pried the lid off at my little kitchen table, and there it was, an envelope soft from handling, with my name on it in her looping cursive. Inside 4,200 in worn small bills, 20s and 10s, the kind of money you save a few dollars at a time over years. And under the cash, a single index card with one line written on it. Build something they can't take. I sat there a long while. I remembered now. She'd pressed this tin into my hands once when I was 16 on the porch, after watching my parents hand Bryce the keys to a new truck. She'd folded my fingers over the lid and told me to hide it and tell no one. And I'd forgotten in the way you forget things that don't yet make sense. She had known years before. That kitchen table, my grandmother had looked at our family and understood exactly which child would need a head start nobody could vote on. The college fund she'd opened was the gift everyone could see, the one my parents could legally drain. This tin was the gift she'd put somewhere their hands couldn't reach. I didn't cry over the money. I cried over being seen. The next morning, I used that 4,200 to place my biggest order yet. And I taped her index card to the wall above my desk, where I would read it every single day for the next several years. Build something they can't take. I intended to. That tin money didn't make me rich. Let me be clear about that, because I hate the stories where a windfall solves everything. 4,200 bought one larger order and a little breathing room. The work still belonged to me. What the money really did was let me stop choosing between rent and inventory for one crucial season. And sometimes one season is the whole difference. I rented a corner of a shared warehouse so I could stop running a company out of my closet. I brought on my first part-time helper, a single mom named Tasha, who packed faster than I ever had. I expanded the product line carefully, only adding things I'd proven people wanted. And then I did something that doubled my world. People kept asking how I'd done it, so I started writing it down. First, a free guide, then a small online course teaching other people, mostly women, how to start the kind of business I'd built from a coffee can. The course did something the products alone couldn't. It turned my hard-won lessons into a second stream of income, one that didn't require buying inventory at all. I taught what I knew because someone, my grandmother, a library full of strangers, had once taught me, and because I decided early that I wouldn't herd the ladder behind me. The business grew the way real things grow unglamorously. A good month followed by a scary one, then 2 good months, then a plateau that taught me patience. I quit the warehouse job the week my own company could finally pay me a steady wage. I walked out of that building for the last time and sat in my car in the parking lot, and I let myself feel it for exactly 5 minutes. Then I drove home to Columbus, because there was an order to fill. There's always an order to fill. It was Rachel again who finally told me the whole truth about that kitchen table. We met for coffee on one of my rare trips back through the county, and she laid it out plainly. When Bryce had taken his big loan to expand the company, the bank had wanted a personal guarantee. My parents had signed it. Worse, they'd backed it with the house. Their home of 30 years, the only thing they truly owned, was tied to my brother's debt. So, when his company started missing payments, the danger wasn't just Bryce's, it was the roof over my parents' heads. "That's why they took your fund," Rachel said quietly. It wasn't only that they loved him more. They were terrified. Saving his company was the only way to save their own home. I sat with that for a moment. And I'll be honest with you, because this channel is about honesty, it softened something in me. Not into forgiveness, into understanding. I could finally see my mother, not as a villain twirling a mustache, but as a frightened woman who'd made a desperate, terrible choice to protect what she'd spent her life building. I understood the fear. I had been afraid, too, on a 2-lane road with no fall semester. But understanding a choice and excusing it are 2 different roads, and I refused to confuse them. Because here is what their fear didn't change. They had a daughter and a house both at risk, and they'd chosen to sacrifice the daughter to save the house, then dressed it up as an honor I should be proud of. Fear explains a lot. It does not turn a child into collateral. I left that coffee shop with more compassion for my mother, and not 1 ounce less resolve. Sometimes both things are true at once. That's the part the family religion never taught me. About a year after I drove out of Millbrook, Bryce's company folded. I didn't hear it from my parents. I heard it from a string of texts and a single stunned voicemail from my mother that she probably didn't mean to leave. The turning point had been a cliff all along. The bridge my tuition had paid for led nowhere. Vendors went unpaid. The lease collapsed. And the grand vision that mattered more than my education quietly closed its doors with a notice taped to the glass. I want to tell you I felt triumphant. I didn't. Not exactly. What I felt was a cold, clean clarity, the kind that comes when reality finally agrees with something you'd known all along. They had spent my future to buy Bryce another year, and the year had changed nothing. The money was simply gone the way water is gone, after it runs through your fingers. His business mattered more, and his business no longer existed. My parents, drowning, did the only thing they knew how to do. They took out a second mortgage on the already pledged house to cover the worst of the fallout from the guarantee. They dug the hole deeper to climb out of it. From Columbus, I watched my family double down on the exact strategy that had cost them so much. And I understood that some people will burn the whole house down before they'll admit they lit the first match. My mother's voicemail asked me to call her back. She sounded older than I remembered. For 1 week a moment, the fixer in me reached for the phone. The girl who used to call the power company and arrange the payment plan wanted to swoop in and solve it. Then I looked up at the index card taped above my desk. Build something they can't take. I put the phone down. I had a company to run and a promise to a woman to keep. The years after that blurred together the way building years do. There were no fireworks, just compounding. The small label became a real brand. The single online course became a small library of them. Tasha became my operations manager and hired a team of her own. I moved out of the shared warehouse into a space with my company's name on the door. And the first time I saw that sign go up, I thought about a girl taping boxes for someone else's profit and had to sit down for a minute. By the time I was 31, the company I'd started from a coffee can and a cookie tin was doing several $1 million a year. I owned it outright. No co-signers, no guarantees. No one standing behind me holding their own house hostage. I built it so that no single person could ever pull the floor out from under it again. Least of all, someone who shared my last name. And here's the thing, people always get wrong about that kind of success. It didn't change how I lived very much. I still drove a sensible car. I still knew the price of groceries. I still worked hard, though I'd finally painfully learned to rest. What the money changed wasn't my lifestyle. It was my leverage. For the first time in my life, I owed no one an explanation, an apology, or a bridge. Quiet wealth is a strange kind of armor. From the outside, I look like the same practical woman who'd left Millbrook in a hatchback that smelled like French fries. On the inside, I'd become something my family had never imagined I could be, completely structurally free of them. They had no idea, and I was in no hurry to tell them. I never announced anything. That was deliberate. In a family that ran on stories, the most powerful thing I owned was a refusal to give them new material. When my parents reached out, which they did in cycles, I kept it short and warm and useless to them. I'd answer a direct question. I would not feed a guilt trip. When Megan fished online and in person for details about what I was up to these days, I gave her nothing she could repackage. I had learned that silence isn't the same as absence. Silence is a wall you build on purpose, with a door only you control. The relatives who'd assumed I'd come crawling back slowly stopped assuming. The story that I was the selfish one got harder to tell when the selfish one simply lived her life, paid her own way, and asked them for nothing. People mistake loud revenge for strong revenge. I came to believe the opposite. The strongest thing I ever did to my family was decline to participate in their drama while quietly becoming someone who didn't need them. No speeches, no social media flex, no triumphant phone call to rub anyone's nose in anything. Just a steady, undeniable life built one honest decision at a time out of their reach. If they wanted to know how I was doing, they'd have to wonder. And wonder, I've learned, is a far heavier thing to carry than any insult I could have hurled. So, I let them wonder for years. I told myself I was past all of it. That the kitchen table was a closed chapter. I'd almost believed it too. Then 13 years, after I'd loaded that hatchback and driven out of Millbrook, an envelope arrived in my mailbox with my mother's the handwriting on it, and I realized the chapter wasn't closed. It had just been waiting for an occasion. The envelope was an invitation. Heavy cardstock, gold lettering, the kind my mother thought of as classy. My parents were celebrating their 35th wedding anniversary with a dinner at the nicest restaurant in Millbrook, the one with the private back room reserved for occasions that mattered. The whole extended family was invited. The card requested the honor of my presence as if we were strangers, which in a way we'd become. I held it for a long time. A part of me wanted to set it aside and send a polite regret and a nice gift. The clean exit, but my phone buzzed almost immediately, as if Megan had been watching the mailbox. "You got the invite," she wrote. It would mean so much to your parents. The whole family will be there. We all need to come together right now. We all need to come together right now. I read that line twice. In my family, come together had never once meant gathering in love. It had always meant gathering around a need, usually a financial one, usually mine to fill. The timing was too neat. An anniversary dinner, the entire family assembled, a public stage, and a careful little message making sure I'd be in the room. I didn't know yet exactly what they wanted, but I'd been raised by these people. I knew the choreography of a Taunton ambush when I felt one starting. Whatever was coming, they wanted witnesses for it. They wanted the pressure of a full room and the warmth of a celebration to do the work that arguments never could. For years, I'd avoided every situation like this. This time, something in me went still and certain. I wrote back without hesitating, "I'll come." Then I sat down to think about what I actually wanted to walk out of that room having said. What my family didn't know was that their carefully controlled world had a leak. A few weeks before the dinner, a woman named Sandra reached out to me through my company. She ran a regional small business group, the kind that meets in hotel conference rooms with bad coffee and big dreams, and she wanted me to speak. Turned out she was also from the county next to Millbrook. Turned out she knew my cousin Rachel. And turned out, in the way of small worlds, that Sandra had mentioned my company and my name at a gathering where one of my mother's friends happened to be sitting. The thread traveled the way threads do. By the time the anniversary approached, a quiet rumor had started circulating back home. Paige Thornton, the daughter who'd left with nothing, the one they'd written off, was apparently doing more than fine. No one had details. That was the delicious part. They had just enough to be curious, and not nearly enough to be sure. Rachel called me half laughing. "You should hear them," she said. "Your mom keeps telling people you've got a little online thing, but Megan's been digging. I think they're starting to realize it's not little." I sat with the phone against my ear and felt the old machinery of my family clicking into a new configuration. They'd invited me to that dinner, believing they were summoning the daughter who needed them. Now, a suspicion was creeping in that maybe they'd summoned someone else entirely. I didn't confirm anything. I didn't deny anything. I let the rumor do what rumors do, swelling in the dark. While I prepared for a dinner that I now understood had two very different scripts running toward the same room, theirs and mine. Only one of us knew there were two. Rachel called one more time 3 days before the dinner, and this time she wasn't laughing. "I found out what it's really about," she said. Bryce, it turned out, had not learned a single thing from the first collapse. He'd started a second company, talked our parents into believing in his vision all over again. And that venture was now circling the same drain as the first, and I understood finally why they kept betting on him. To stop now would mean admitting the unthinkable, that they'd drain their daughter's future and mortgaged their house twice over for nothing. The deeper they sank, the more they needed Bryce to win, because his success was the only thing that could make their choices forgivable. So, they doubled down on the one bet they couldn't afford to lose. The numbers were bad. The new business was weeks from going under, and the family home, still tangled in the old guarantee, was once again in the line of fire. "They're going to ask you," Rachel said, at the dinner in front of everyone. "They think if they do it publicly with all the family there, you won't be able to say no." I felt something cold and clear settle over me, the same feeling I'd had at the bank counter at 18. Of course, the anniversary wasn't a celebration. It was a setup. They would toast 35 years of marriage, get everyone soft and sentimental. And then in front of 30 relatives holding champagne, they would frame my brother's bailout as an act of family love. They would make my refusal look like cruelty in front of the only audience whose opinion they thought I cared about. And the kicker, the part that made me almost admire the nerve of it, was that they planned to dress it in the same words as before. Support the family. Be proud. They were going to run the exact play from the kitchen table, just on a bigger stage. betting that I was still the girl who could be guilted into being load-bearing. They had no idea who they'd invited. I thanked Rachel, hung up, and did not feel angry. I felt focused. They wanted a public moment. Fine, I'd give them one. I could have skipped it. I want you to know that, because the easiest revenge would have been simple absence. To let them set their stage and then never show up, leaving them to explain the empty chair. But absence would have let them keep the story. In my family's version, I'd still be the daughter who abandoned them, who was too proud, too cold, too good for her own people. If I didn't go, that story would calcify into family legend, repeated at every holiday for the rest of my parents' lives. I didn't want to win by disappearing. I wanted to win by standing in the middle of their own stage, in their own restaurant, in front of their own witnesses and calmly, finally telling the truth. Not to humiliate them, to free myself. There's a difference. And at 31, I finally understood it, so I prepared the way I prepare for everything, which is to say, thoroughly and without drama. I didn't write a speech. Speeches are for people who need volume to feel powerful, and I'd left that need on a porch a long time ago. Instead, I decided on one thing only, that no matter what they said, no matter how they framed it, I would stay calm. They would bring the heat. I would bring the temperature down. The night before I drove out, I looked at the index card, still taped above my desk, soft now at the corners from years of reading. Build something they can't take. I'd done it. The company was untouchable. But I realized that night the card had always meant more than a business. The thing they couldn't take was me. The whole cell I'd assembled out of warehouse, shifts and library books, and one stubborn refusal to be spent. I packed an overnight bag. In the morning, I drove to Millbrook. Millbrook hadn't changed. The same grain silos, the same 2-lane road, the same restaurant with the green awning where the town held its weddings and its funerals, sometimes for the same families. I parked, checked my reflection once, and walked in calm. The private back room glowed with rented warmth. 30-some relatives milled around a long table, draped in white, a tired cake near the window, a banner reading 35 years strung above the doorway. My mother spotted me first and crossed the room with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You came," she said, and hugged me a beat too long. "The way you hold someone you're about to ask for something." My father shook my hand, formal and strange. And Bryce worked the room like a man auditioning for his own rescue, clapping shoulders, laughing too loud, telling anyone who'd listen about the exciting new direction of his business. I watched him perform comeback for a crowd that didn't yet know there was nothing to come back from. Megan glided over with 2 glasses of champagne and pressed one into my hand. "We're so glad you're here," she said. "Family should be together for this. Be proud of supporting the family," hung in the air, unspoken, like a song everyone in the room knew the words to, except they were waiting for the right verse. I took the champagne and didn't drink it. I made small talk. I complimented the keiki, and the whole time, under the warm lights and the careful smiles, I could feel the trap being set around me, gentle as a tablecloth being smoothed. They were waiting for the toasts. They were waiting for the room to get soft. They were waiting for the moment to spring it. So was I. Dinner came and went in a haze of small talk and clinking silverware. Then my father stood, tapped his glass, and the room hushed. He thanked everyone for coming. He spoke about 35 years of marriage, about weathering hard times together, about family being the thing that gets you through. It was a good speech, warm and a little rehearsed, and for a moment I almost forgot what I knew was coming. Then he pivoted, smooth as a man who'd practiced the turn. And speaking of getting through hard times together, he said, "This family has always believed in showing up for each other." A few relatives nodded. I set down my fork. Here it was. My mother rose to stand beside him, and Bryce straightened in his chair, and I watched the choreography I'd predicted unfold exactly on schedule. My father talked about Bryce's bold new venture, about how a true family invests in its own, about how proud they all were of the success in this very room. Heads turned vaguely toward Bryce, who did his best to look like a man worth investing in. And then my father did the thing I'd been waiting for. His eyes found me. The whole room's attention drifted after his, settling on the daughter at the end of the table, who hadn't said much all night. Paige has done well for herself, he said in a tone that was half compliment and half setup. And family takes care of family. The temperature in the room shifted. People sensed something was happening without knowing what. My mother was looking at me with naked hope. Bryce had the decency at least to look slightly ashamed. And I sat very still, hands folded, and waited for them to say the actual words, because I had decided I would make them say it out loud. My mother was the one who finally said it because she'd always been the one with the nerve for the hard asks. She came around the table and put a hand on my shoulder, performing tenderness for the room, and she spoke loudly enough that everyone could hear. "Honey, we're going to be honest because that's what families do." She took a breath. "Bryce's company has hit a rough patch, a serious one, and we know you've been doing well. We were hoping, we were praying, really that you might help your brother get through this, the way we all helped each other when you were young." There it was. The whole room held its breath, and then she delivered the line, the same line, polished and aimed. The one I'd carried out of that kitchen at 18. "Be proud of supporting the family, sweetheart. That's all we're asking." I felt the eyes of 30 relatives land on me at once. I felt the trap close, soft and absolute. They'd done it perfectly. A celebration, a crowd, a tender mother, a public plea framed as love. Any answer but yes would look to this room like coldness. To say no was to be the villain at the anniversary dinner. To say yes was to be load-bearing again forever. For a brother who would never stop needing a bridge. My mother squeezed my shoulder. Confident now, certain the room had done its work. Bryce wouldn't quite meet my eyes. My father wore the relieved look of a man who thought the difficult part was the asking. They had made the exact same miscalculation they'd made 13 years ago. They believed the hard part was getting the words out. They believed my silence meant I was deciding whether to say yes. I let the quiet stretch one beat longer than was comfortable. Then I reached up, gently removed my mother's hand from my shoulder, and stood. I didn't get to speak first. Sandra did, and she had no idea what she was walking into. She was there as a guest of a cousin, the small business woman from the next county. And in the warm lull, after my mother's plea, she said the most ordinary, devastating thing. "You must be so proud of her already," Sandra said to my mother, beaming. "Paige spoke to our whole association last month, 300 people. Do you know what her company's doing now? She's one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the region." The room went still in a different way. My mother's hand, still hovering near my shoulder, dropped. What she said. Sandra, delighted, kept going, oblivious. Her brand, the home goods line, and those courses. She's built something incredible. Self-made completely. We had her on a panel with people twice her age. Several relatives turned to look at me with expressions rearranging in real time, the dawning recognition of people who'd been told one story and were suddenly handed another. My cousin Rachel across the table was failing to hide a smile. I watched my parents' faces do the math they'd refused to do for 13 years. They had stood up in front of their entire family to ask their failing son's little sister to bail him out, framing it as charity she should be grateful to give. And in doing so, they'd put me on a stage in front of everyone, exactly the place I'd quietly arranged not to need them to put me. The daughter they'd spent and discarded was, it turned out, the most successful person in the room, not the brother they had mortgaged a house for. Me. I let Sandra finish. I let the silence that followed sink all the way to the bottom. Then, into a room that finally understood, I spoke for the first time all night, calmly, clearly, with my hands resting easy at my sides. "Thank you, Sandra," I said. "That's kind of you." Then I turned to my parents, and I kept my voice as level as a countertop. "You're right that this family taught me about supporting each other. I learned it very young." I looked at my mother. "I learned it the week before college when you sat me down and told me you'd given my tuition to Bryce. Do you remember what you said?" She didn't answer, so I said it for her, gently without heat. "You said his business mattered more." The words landed in that room like a glass dropped on tile. A few relatives audibly inhaled. Clearly, this was not the version they'd been told. "I didn't argue then," I went on. "I just left. And I built a company you didn't believe I could build with money you couldn't reach. Because someone in this family once told me to build something you couldn't take. I let that sit. So, here's my answer. No, I won't be funding Bryce's second company. Not because I'm cold, because I already gave to this family, and I was never asked, and I was told to be proud of it." That was when Bryce exploded. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping back hard. "After everything this family did for you," he shouted, his face going red, the comeback act dissolving into the real thing. "You think you're better than us now? You ungrateful." My mother was crying, not the soft kind, the loud kind, telling the room I was breaking her heart on her anniversary. My father demanded I lower my voice, though mine was the only quiet one left. The room had inverted completely. They were the storm. I was the still point at the center of it. I didn't raise my voice once. I'd learned on a Lane Road 13 years before that the person who stays calm is the only one anyone remembers is right. I waited for Bryce to run out of fury the way you wait out a summer storm under an awning. When the room finally went quiet again, I spoke to all of them calm and clear. "I'm not angry anymore. I want you to hear that. I'm not here to humiliate anyone." I looked around at the relatives, the cake, the banner that said 35 years strong. "But I'm done being the person this family spends." Supporting the family was never supposed to mean erasing one of its children. My mother started to speak, and I held up a one hand not unkindly. "You made a choice about my future without me. I made mine without you. We both have to live with them now." I set my untouched champagne on the table. "I love you. That's the part that always made it complicated. Loving people doesn't mean handing them the floor to stand on while you lie down." I learned that the hard way. Then I said the last thing mostly to myself. The line that had carried me out of a closet and into my own life. "I built something you can't take. And what you can't take, you can't ask me to give." There was nothing left to argue. I said it without a raised voice, without a single insult, without giving them the explosion they could use to make me the villain. The only people shouting that night shared the name Thornan. And it wasn't me. I'd come into that room as the daughter they summoned to be useful, and I was leaving it as something they'd never managed to make me. Finished, not bitter, not cruel, finished. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. The room watched me 30 faces, and for once, not one of them had a story ready to tell about me. I didn't storm out. Storming out would have been one more performance, and I was done performing for that room. I folded my napkin and laid it beside my plate. I looked at my parents and I meant it when I said, "Happy anniversary. 35 years is something." Then I turned to the rest of the family. The cousins and aunts who'd come for cake and gotten the truth instead. And I said goodnight like a woman leaving an ordinary dinner. Rachel caught my eye and mouthed something that looked like finally. I walked out through the green awning door into the cool Millbrook evening, and I didn't look back. Not because looking back would have hurt, but because there was simply nothing back there I needed anymore. My car was where I'd left it. I sat for a moment in the quiet, hands on the wheel, and noticed something I hadn't expected. I wasn't shaking. My heart wasn't pounding. The girl who'd driven out of this town at 18 with grief in her throat had become a woman who could drive out of it with nothing in her throat at all. That, I think, is what healing actually feels like. Not a triumphant scene, just a steady pulse and a clear road. I started the engine and pulled onto the 2-lane road heading back toward Columbus, toward my company and my life and the index card on my wall. Behind me, the banner still read 35 years strong. Ahead of me, the road was dark and open and entirely my own. The call started the next morning, and they have never fully stopped. My mother first, with messages that swung between apology and accusation, sometimes in the same voicemail. My father, who'd never called me in his life, suddenly leaving stiff messages about moving past this as a family. Even Bryce weeks later with a text that started as a demand and limped into something almost like an apology before asking again for money. I don't pick up. Not out of revenge, out of peace. I learned a long time ago that a phone you don't answer is a boundary you don't have to defend. The fallout was exactly as measurable as these things get. Bryce's second company folded like the first. He sold his house and went to work for someone else, which I hear has been good for him, though I only hear it secondhand. My parents kept their home, but they kept it by finally tightening their own belts instead of reaching into someone else's pocket, which is the thing they could have done all along. Some of the relatives reached out to me afterward quietly to say they'd never known the real story. A few apologized. Rachel and I are closer than ever. I didn't get a tearful reconciliation, and I've made my peace with that. Not every story ends with everyone hugging. Some end with one person finally putting down a weight they were never supposed to carry. I still run my company. I still mentor women starting out with a coffee can and a stubborn streak. And the tin box from my grandmother sits on a shelf in my office, empty now, worth more than anything that was ever in it. If there's one thing I'd want you to carry out of this, it's that family isn't owed your future. That walking away in time isn't quitting, but the very first thing you ever truly build for yourself. And that the people who tell you to be proud of being spent are simply hoping you'll never notice you were allowed to keep your own life. That's the whole story. The kitchen on table, the soda glass, the $4,000 in a cookie tin, the anniversary toast that turned into a reckoning. If you've ever been told to shrink so someone else could grow, let this be your sign to build something they can't take starting today, with whatever coffee can you've got. Tell me in the comments where you are in your own story. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more.